The sadness that once drowned you now reveals where you abandoned yourself. The anxiety that once ruled your life now speaks of parts of you that crave safety and certainty. You begin to understand that emotions are not problems to be solved. They are signals asking for awareness. Healing teaches you to sit with discomfort without letting it define you. You realize that pain has intelligence, that every wave of emotion comes to reveal a deeper layer of truth. Instead of running from anger, you trace its roots. Instead of suppressing fear, you listen to what it is trying to protect. You stop labeling emotions as good or bad and start seeing them as energy in motion, as pure expressions of your inner landscape. The healed mind no longer says, "Why is this happening to me?" but instead asks, "What is this showing me?" That question is the threshold of transformation. It's where emotional reactivity turns into emotional awareness. You no longer feel powerless before your own feelings. You begin to collaborate with them. You realize that even the darkest emotions have sacred purposes. When we do not yet know who we are, we search for our reflection in other people's eyes. We need their acknowledgement to feel real. We depend on their approval to feel safe. Yet, no one can truly understand you beyond the limits of their own awareness. Every person sees through the lens of their own history, pain, and conditioning. To expect total understanding from others is to chase a mirage. It keeps you running in circles around an illusion. Healing brings you home to yourself. You start to recognize that being at peace is an inner event, not an outer reward. The more you know yourself, the less you need others to confirm you. You stop explaining your choices to those who have never walked your path. You stop defending your growth to people still living in the same cage you've escaped. You stop watering relationships that cannot meet you at your depth. Instead, you turn inward, you find refuge in your own awareness. You discover that peace is not something you earn through acceptance. It's something you embody when you align with your truth. You begin to realize that those who misunderstand you are not your enemies. They are simply mirrors showing how far you've come. There is a quiet power in letting others think what they want while you stay rooted in your authenticity. You no longer rush to correct their perceptions because you understand that misunderstanding is not a threat. It's a natural byproduct of individuality. Every soul sees from its own altitude of consciousness, and that's okay. You do not need to lower yours for the sake of comfort or conformity. As your awareness grows, your relationships evolve. Some drift away, some resist your transformation, some will label your silence as pride, your independence as arrogance, your solitude as sadness. But you begin to see that their judgments say more about their fears than about your truth. You learn to stay soft, yet unshaken, kind, yet unbending, compassionate, yet free. You realize that real peace is not found in convincing others to understand your journey. It's found in understanding yourself deeply enough that their misunderstanding no longer disturbs you. You become your own witness, your own mirror, your own home. The energy once spent on explaining yourself turns inward, feeding your clarity and creativity. This shift marks a sacred turning point, the transition from outer validation to inner stability. You are no longer tossed about by opinions, praise, or rejection. You begin to walk with a quiet confidence, not loud, not boastful, but serene. You can stand alone, still feel whole. And it's in that solitude that true peace reveals itself, the kind of peace that doesn't depend on agreement, understanding, or applause. It's the peace of knowing who you are, even when no one else does. It's the stillness of living from your essence, not your ego. It's the quiet triumph of realizing that you no longer need the world to understand you in order to love yourself. There was a time when you believed that to let go meant to lose, that surrender was for the weak, the weary, and the defeated. You were taught that strength meant holding on to people, to plans, to control. You thought that the tighter your grip, the safer you were. And so you fought, you resisted life's uncertainty. You tried to bend every situation to your will. You wrestled with time, with outcomes, with yourself. Yet, the more you tried to control, the more life slipped through your fingers. Healing reveals a quiet truth. Surrender is not the end of strength. It is its beginning. When you surrender, you are not giving up, you are giving over. You stop fighting the natural rhythm of existence and start moving with it. You realize that life does not need to be controlled, it needs to be trusted. The river does not need to be pushed to flow. It already knows the way to the sea. In the same way, your life has an intelligence of its own. When you surrender to it, you align with that deeper wisdom. There is a profound difference between defeat and surrender. Defeat breaks your spirit. Surrender awakens it. Defeat is rooted in despair. Surrender is rooted in trust. Defeat says, I have failed. Surrender says, I am guided. To the mind that thrives on control, these two can look identical. Both may involve letting go. Both may end in release. But one leads to resignation, while the other leads to revelation. Through healing, you begin to see that much of your suffering came not from life itself, but from your resistance to it. You suffered not because things went wrong, but because you refused to let them go. The pain of holding on to what's leaving is always greater than the pain of accepting that it's gone. When you learn to surrender, you begin to experience peace even in the midst of uncertainty. You stop demanding that life fit your expectations and start allowing it to unfold in its own mysterious way. Surrender is not passive, it is deeply active. It takes immense courage to release control in a world that worships domination. It takes deep faith to say, I don't know where this path leads, but I will walk it anyway. When you surrender, you trade the illusion of control for the reality of freedom. You no longer need to know what's next to trust that you'll be okay when it arrives. You begin to understand that your role is not to command life, but to cooperate with it. This surrender also transforms how you see endings. You no longer see them as failures or punishments, but as transitions, as sacred closures, making space for what's meant to come. What once felt like loss now feels like liberation. You learn to say goodbye without bitterness, to release without resentment. You realize that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning, and surrender is the soil that allows it to grow. In surrender, you also rediscover humility, not the kind that belittles the self, but the kind that honors the vastness of life. You begin to understand that you are not the master architect of every detail. You are a co-creator with forces larger than yourself. You start to see life not as a battle to be won, but as a dialogue between your will and destiny's design. And as this awareness deepens, something miraculous happens. You feel lighter. You begin to breathe more freely. You have not only healed, you have awakened. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when you look back and realize the storms that once shook you no longer command your fear. You've been walking through your own darkness, thinking you were still broken, still wounded, still lost. But quietly, invisibly, something within you has been mending. Healing does not announce itself with fireworks. It arrives in silence, in subtle shifts, in the way you now respond to life. There was a time when every emotion that rose within you felt like an enemy, a force that came to destroy your peace, to disrupt your balance, to pull you back into pain. You resisted them, silenced them, buried them beneath layers of distraction and denial. But no matter how far you ran, they followed, because emotions are not intruders, they are messengers from the unconscious, each one carrying a story that your mind has forgotten but your soul remembers. When you begin to heal, something changes in your relationship with your inner storms. You start to observe instead of react. The anger that once consumed you now becomes a mirror, showing where your boundaries were crossed. Guilt humbles the ego. Shame points to where love was withheld. Jealousy reveals unacknowledged desires. Each one, when understood, becomes a stepping stone toward wholeness. To see your emotions as teachers means to honor their message before you silence them. When you feel anger, you pause and breathe into it, not to suppress it, but to decode it. When you feel sorrow, you no longer distract yourself. You allow it to flow, because you know that tears cleanse what the heart cannot express in words. When you feel fear, you don't let it paralyze you. You use it as a compass, guiding you toward what needs courage and trust. In this way, emotional awareness becomes spiritual maturity. You stop blaming others for how you feel and start taking responsibility for how you respond. You learn to sit in stillness when the storm rises within, knowing it will pass, and that the lesson will remain. You no longer identify with every emotional wave. You become the ocean that holds them. This is one of the clearest signs of deep healing. when emotions no longer drag you into unconscious reaction, but invite you into conscious reflection. You feel them fully, yet they no longer control you. You see their wisdom, not their chaos. You start to thank them for showing you what still needs attention, what still needs compassion, what still needs to be integrated. Healing, after all, is not about feeling nothing. It is about feeling everything with awareness. And when your emotions become your teachers, your pain transforms into understanding, and your understanding into peace. One of the most profound signs of inner healing is when your peace no longer depends on being understood by others in the early stages of life. And even in the early stages of awakening, we crave validation like air. We want others to see what we see, to feel what we feel, to confirm that we are right, good, worthy, or evolving. When people misunderstand us, it feels like a wound. Their disapproval burns, their indifference cuts deep, and their judgment echoes in our minds. But as healing deepens, something shifts. You begin to understand that the need to be understood is rooted in a fragile sense of self. You stop trying to make everything happen and start trusting what is happening. You no longer live in constant tension between what is and what should be. You begin to rest, not in apathy, but in acceptance. Surrender then becomes your quiet revolution, a sacred act of courage that says, I am no longer at war with life. And in that peace you discover a strength that no amount of control could ever give you. There comes a stage in every inner journey when you stop seeking the light as an escape from the dark and begin to understand that both belong to the same truth. The path of healing is not about purging the darkness within, but about integrating it. The parts of you that you once despised, the jealousy, the rage, the fear, the shame, are not the enemies of your soul. They are the fragments you abandoned on the way to becoming good. When you begin to heal, something profound happens. You stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be whole. You see that perfection is a mask, an armor you wore to be accepted. But wholeness is the courage to face what you have hidden. It's to look into your own depths and say, even this is me. The shadow is not evil. It is the unseen, the unloved, the misunderstood part of yourself. It holds everything your conscious mind rejected to survive in the world. Your vulnerability, your impulses, your hidden desires, your repressed creativity. You built a personality, a self, that the world could accept. In doing so, you buried everything that did not fit into that image. But what you repress does not disappear. It waits. It lives in your reactions, your projections, your relationships. It speaks through your anger and pain, longing for acknowledgement. To recognize the shadow is to stop projecting it onto others. It is to realize that what irritates you in another person often reflects something unresolved within yourself. You begin to see that your external conflicts mirror your internal wars. You stop saying, they make me angry, and start asking, what part of me feels unseen when this happens? This shift in perception changes everything, because it replaces blame with awareness. Healing then becomes an act of radical honesty. You turn your gaze inward, not to condemn, but to understand. You start to revisit the moments of your life where you fragmented, the childhood shame, the moments of rejection, the times you were told, don't cry or be strong. You meet those exiled parts with compassion. You realize they never left you. You just stop listening. And as you welcome them back, your soul begins to feel whole again. When you integrate your shadow, your relationships change. You stop needing others to carry your darkness for you. You stop attracting chaos just to meet the parts of yourself you've denied. You no longer need to perform goodness or hide behind spirituality. You become authentic, raw, real, human. You realize that true light is not born from denial, but from understanding. This integration also transforms your relationship with morality. You stop dividing the world into right and wrong, good and bad. Instead, you begin to perceive from a higher vantage point, a place where paradoxes coexist. You understand that love and anger, peace and chaos, creation and destruction are all expressions of the same living force moving through you. The task is not to suppress one for the other, but to balance them. Recognizing your shadow also deepens your empathy for others. When you accept your own darkness, you stop judging the darkness in others. You see the brokenness behind cruelty, the fear beneath pride, the pain beneath indifference. You start to love more wisely because you see more clearly. You no longer demand purity. You seek authenticity. You understand that every person like you is carrying light and shadow, wrestling with unseen forces within. In this way, healing becomes an initiation into wholeness. You are no longer a fragmented being chasing after light. You become the one who contains both. The darkness no longer threatens you, it guides you. It becomes your source of depth, creativity, and wisdom. You understand that to be truly alive, you must embrace everything you are, the saint and the sinner, the dreamer and the doubter, the wounded and the healer. And that moment, when you look into your own shadow without fear, that is when you begin to experience freedom, because you finally see nothing within you is against you. Everything is trying to come home. One of the clearest signs that your soul has matured is when you no longer need noise to feel alive. There was a time when silence frightened you, when the quiet felt empty, cold, and unbearable. You filled it with conversations, distractions, and chaos, mistaking constant stimulation for connection. You thought that to be visible, you had to speak louder. To be valued, you had to react faster. To be loved, you had to be everywhere, involved in everything. But healing has its own rhythm, and it teaches you the art of restraint, the sacred value of quiet. When you begin to heal, you no longer crave the drama that once fueled your sense of identity. You realize that not every story deserves your participation, not every argument requires your defense, and not every invitation to conflict must be accepted. You learn that peace is not the absence of problems, it's the absence of unnecessary reaction. Silence, once uncomfortable, becomes your sanctuary. You start to recognize that in quiet moments you hear the truth of things. You hear your intuition whispering, the soul breathing, the heart remembering. The silence that once made you restless now gives you clarity. It allows you to observe life without the distortion of noise. You begin to understand that words often conceal what silence can reveal. You stop rushing to respond. You listen more than you speak. You no longer feel the need to defend your worth or prove your point. There is a deep strength in letting others have the last word, not because you are weak, but because you have nothing to prove. You begin to see that most arguments are not battles for truth, but struggles for dominance, and the one who is centered does not need to compete for power. They already possess it inwardly. Choosing silence doesn't mean indifference. It means discernment. It means knowing where your energy belongs and where it does not. When you are healed, you become selective with your attention. You begin to protect your peace as something sacred. You no longer give your time to things that drain your essence. You withdraw from gossip, meaningless debates, and people who thrive on conflict. You no longer need to fix everything or everyone. You trust that understanding will come where it's meant to. In silence, you start to perceive the subtleties of human behavior. You see that behind every loud ego is a frightened heart. Behind every insult is pain unprocessed. Behind every argument is a plea for validation. You understand that responding with noise only feeds the same unconscious patterns you've outgrown. True healing allows you to see beyond the surface, to meet the world not with reaction, but with understanding. This quiet maturity changes the way you communicate. Your words become intentional, fewer but deeper. You speak only when your words can heal, clarify, or bring peace. You start to value pauses in conversations, stillness in relationships, and solitude in your daily life. You realize that growth is not always visible or dramatic. Sometimes it's found in the moments when you choose not to speak, not to retaliate, not to engage. And when you master this silence, life begins to mirror your calm. Chaos no longer finds a home in you. Conflicts dissolve because they cannot survive in your stillness. You no longer seek to win. You seek to understand. You no longer crave attention. You crave alignment. You no longer shout your truth, you live it quietly. You begin to realize that silence is not emptiness, it is fullness unspoken. It is the echo of your own awareness expanding beyond reaction. It's the kind of silence that doesn't distance you from life, but brings you closer to its essence. In this stillness, you find wisdom that words can never hold, the wisdom of being fully present, utterly awake, and profoundly at peace. The world remains noisy, but you are no longer pulled into its storm. You walk through it with serenity, knowing that true power is not in how loudly you speak, but in how deeply you listen. There is a subtle but profound shift that happens when healing has ripened within you. You stop being driven by pain and begin to be guided by purpose. For much of life, we move from one wound to another, one reaction to the next. We make choices to avoid hurt, to protect what's fragile, or to prove our worth. Pain becomes our compass, shaping our relationships, ambitions, and even our dreams. We chase success to silence insecurity. We seek love to fill emptiness, and we act out of fear disguised as desire. But there comes a time, usually after you've walked through enough darkness, when something in you changes. You stop living merely to avoid suffering and start living to express meaning. You realize that pain, while it once defined you, no longer directs you. It becomes a teacher, not a master. You begin to ask not, how can I escape pain? But what is this pain trying to awaken in me? That question is the threshold of transformation. The moment you begin to live from purpose. Purpose is not found outside of you, it unfolds from within. It's the natural direction of your healed self, the way the soul expresses its truth once it's no longer trapped in survival mode. When your identity is no longer built around wounds, you stop repeating cycles of suffering. You no longer choose paths out of fear of rejection, loss, or failure. Instead, you begin to act from alignment, from a place of inner knowing that whispers, "This is who I am meant to be." To live from purpose means to make peace with your past. The experiences that once seemed meaningless or cruel begin to make sense when seen from a higher perspective. You start to recognize how every loss shaped your depth, how every failure refined your strength, and how every heartbreak expanded your compassion. You no longer resent your story, you reclaim it. What once felt like punishment now feels like preparation. You understand that your pain was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal what was indestructible within you. As you embody this understanding, your energy changes. You stop chasing fulfillment and start radiating it. Your actions are no longer reactive. They are creative. You no longer seek purpose as a goal to reach. You live it as a state of being. Purpose becomes the way you breathe, speak, and show up in the world. It infuses your smallest actions with meaning, even when no one sees them. Living from purpose also changes how you relate to others. You stop trying to fix people, control them, or rescue them. You realize that everyone must walk their own path toward awakening. You offer your light not to force transformation, but to remind others of their own. Your love becomes freer, your boundaries clearer, your presence stronger. You no longer seek connection from emptiness, but from wholeness. Pain once made you reactive, chasing relief. Purpose makes you responsive, creating meaning. You no longer live in defense of your wounds. You live in service of your evolution. You understand that your gifts, your empathy, your insight, your strength were born from the very places that once hurt the most. The scar that once made you ashamed becomes the mark of your humanity, proof that you have walked through fire and emerged more alive. When you live from purpose, life stops being a series of random events and becomes a coherent story, one guided by something greater than logic or fear. You feel yourself moving in harmony with life's deeper intelligence. You trust your timing, your path, and even your pain. You no longer measure your worth by what you achieve, but by how authentically you live. And as you follow this quiet sense of purpose, you discover something extraordinary. Peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of alignment. The peace that comes when your actions, emotions, and intentions all move in the same direction. You are no longer running from your past or grasping at the future. You are here, alive, present, and free. Not because the pain disappeared, but because it finally transformed into meaning. Healing is not the act of becoming someone new. It is the art of remembering who you have always been. Beneath the layers of pain, fear, and delusion, there has always been a self untouched by suffering, a quiet center that observes, endures, and knows. When you begin to live from that center, you realize that life was never against you. Every wound, every loss, every darkness was a call to awaken to your own depth. The path of wholeness is not about escaping the shadow, but embracing it. You have learned that your emotions are sacred guides, that your solitude is not isolation but communion, that surrender is not defeat but participation in a greater intelligence. You have discovered that peace is not found in control, but in trust. True healing does not make you invulnerable. It makes you real. It allows you to live without masks, to love without fear, to walk through chaos without losing your ground. It turns pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom, and confusion into clarity. You no longer seek the light as something distant. You carry it within you. And perhaps this is the quiet miracle of your journey, that after everything you can look at your scars and no longer see tragedy, but transformation. You can look at your past and no longer feel resentment, but reverence. For every fall has led you closer to truth, and every shadow has deepened your light. So now when the storms come, as they surely will, you will no longer ask, why me? You will whisper, what is life trying to reveal through me? And in that moment, you will know